Okay, good morning, Sean. Nice to have you with us this morning.
Nice to chat with you too.
Yeah, so you are here to talk about your new show. What was it Party Luggage? Is that the name
Party,
of the
party baggage.
Party Luggage? That's right. As you know, close enough. Baggage luggage. So can you give us a very quick overview of what the show is about?
The show is looking at. There are two main characters in the play, Nat and Finn, and their friendship is at that stage in their mid-20s where naturally, anyway, different interests come in, so they start to drift apart. But Nat is pregnant by Finn's ex-boyfriend, which has naturally driven in a bit of a bigger wedge between the two of them. And neither of them are particularly good with communicating. So the two of them have decided that to try and overcome whatever issues they have, they're going to stage a play to talk with an audience to almost hold a referendum on their friendship of whether or not it's worth salvaging, tell the story of what's to come. And the story unfolds about the time when Finn had planned Nat a baby shower to show her that he cared. And it kind of plays along with that as the main run through of the story, but within each character, it's very much a play of two one-person shows, but also duologues in between. It's a real mix of the two. Because a good 70% of the play is just either Sharina and I on our own, kind of performing our own stories and telling the audience about each of our characters' own lives. And Sharina's follows along with her fear of becoming a mother based on based on the fact that she didn't have a particularly good mother, the character. And mine is much more to do with his aversion to babies. Why does he feel weird about the idea of Nat having this baby? Because it is bigger than just with his ex-boyfriend. There's much deeper themes to it than that, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But yeah, that's basically what it's about. It's quite complicated to explain, but it is very funny. That feels like it goes without saying. It sounds like something that's really heavy, but it is actually intentionally laugh out loud funny. And I know I'm biased because I wrote it and I'm also in it. But watching Sharina in particular, Sharina is who's playing Nat, is she's an actress who doesn't really necessarily truly believe that she's very comedic. She would never paint herself as such, which, as I've always said to her, actually makes her even funnier. And we've been doing these little promo videos and stuff that are trying to like get the funny side of it out of it and whatever else. And she's so funny. I think because she doesn't naturally feel funny, that it kind of just when she goes to be funny, it seems so random and ridiculous that it's therefore laugh out loud hilarious. So it's a wonderful mix of everything, and I'm loving doing it.
Actually, what you're saying, really, with Sharina's role and her character and the character she plays, it's almost like just that dry sense of humor, which is a very British thing, I have to say. Maybe it plays along something
It's definitely
along
dry.
those lines,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I actually would say probably my character is more of the dry humor. And I would say Sharina's is just, I never thought when I was writing it that it was particularly, I don't know, bombastic is the word I want to use. It's like just big and stupid at different points. Like it really leans into, when it's being funny, it's being very funny. And there was what I've been trying to do, and we've been doing the promo for this. And I wanted to make a series of different videos and such that we've been slowly putting out once every week to do with the play and all the different themes, was touch on different vibes the play elicited inside of these videos. And a really good way of describing it is the way that, especially the first video we did and some of the other ones, where it kind of will be so full of despair for like 2 minutes and then completely bounce back to the most kind of ridiculously silly thing you've ever thought of. Because this play was born of really writing about life and death. Because Nat is birth in Latin and Finn is end. So the idea was always this play would be much more about life and death. And it was originally, it was a lot heavier and it wasn't really about these two characters at all. It was very, very different. It's gone through many different iterations before eventually actually landing on this script of it. And in that time, it's gone through the heavier versions. I just knew it needed to add some levity to it. It was definitely a theme that, looking at life and death, babies, being born, etc., is so heavy. And the idea of doing anything that's incredibly heavy turns me off entirely, just because you need the sugar to make the medicine go down, like that
And
is.
and that's exactly why you've added the humor into this, I guess, And until you mentioned it didn't even occur to me that about the beginning and the end kind of an element,
Yeah.
with regards to the characters' names. And actually, it's funny that you said actually it's been through a few iterations of this. So, are you able to share with us how you conceptualized the start of this and what kind of iterations it has gone through so far?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey with this play. It's kind of been the chip on my shoulder for a good, like, for literally 5 years. It's been a really long time. So the first play I did, I was 19. I took a play to Edinburgh called Paper Dolls and loved doing that experience and everything. And I'd gone to school with Sharina. So we did like A-level drama and stuff together. And I've always thought since the day I saw Sharina first perform that she is one of the best actresses I've ever seen, full stop, regardless of fame or anything. She is absolutely incredible. So it kind of became my thing of like, okay, if I'm writing things for people to be in, I need to be carrying her with me. Like the world can't not see Sharina shine. Like she's so fantastic. So we'd done a web series when we first left school called Pickle. Great fun. Did it on no money. Had like 40 odd people involved. It was so much fun. Great learning lesson. But anyway, we did that. Did the play. So in the midst, I did Paper Dolls, and after that, I thought I really want to do a play with Sharina. I know I really, really do. It's something for the two of us. That would be great. So in 2019 kind of time, I started to work on this idea of a play called Thank You to the Cat because I'd seen this article from the New Yorker. It was titled something like, Is it better to have never been born? And when I saw it come up on Facebook, I thought, my God, that is really heavy. I thought, what on earth is that about? So I clicked on it out of intrigue because the title was convincing. And it was exploring this philosophical idea of antinatalism, which is very heavy, and I won't go too far into it. But essentially, it is this idea of, is it better to have never been born? Do we live our lives in pain? It's very complicated. For as many people I've explained it to over the years, because everyone I know is sick of hearing about it, because I got fixated on this idea 5 years ago. Don't necessarily believe in it, but the idea of it was so bizarre to me, like really turned my head towards like my own mortality. It was so strange. Like I came obsessed with it. I read the books, all the academic books on it. I read and I got really into it. So I decided I thought this was an interesting idea for a play, which is where this idea of Thank You to the Cat came from, because it was explored in this book that he said something along the lines of it was about the randomness of being born, which is what really had fixated me. And it said about how someone gave an anecdote that said the night they were conceived, their parents were sleeping and their parents' dog came in, licked one of their parents' hands, woke them up. One thing led to another and they were conceived. And they said in there they were so grateful to their family dog for giving them life. And I thought it was so weird. I thought, wow, that's really bizarre. So I thought that's brilliant. So I thought, well, I don't really like dogs, I like cats. So I conceived this idea of Thank You to the Cat. The idea was based around this whole thing that this cat had done this thing. And I got so entrenched in it. This was in 2019, as I say. And it was so hard to turn this theory into a story or build it into stories that were not just so heavy. Like, based on what I've just told you, it sounds really like, oh my gosh, that's just not entertaining.
Well,
It's,
it's heavy and also philosophical, right? I think potentially one of the dangers with these kind of directions is that obviously it can drag on for quite a
yeah,
long time, and also you may need to provide a lot of explanations, right? Along the way in order for people to click exactly what the messaging is.
exactly.
Um,
It becomes like a lecture. It does get to the point where I'm writing, I'm thinking, I'm literally just writing an essay based on this. Like, this is not a play. This is just me regurgitating this idea for the sake of it because they were interesting ideas. So I had a version called that. It's then it got changed to something about beekeepers, which Sharina and I are playing these two like life and death again beekeepers. And then it was called It's the Poison She Wields or something for a while. And then it was called something else. And then it was about people that like it is over the 5 years, it has been a burden to me, really. It's been so hard. And I've written other plays in the interim that we've done. Sharina's pregnant in this play, obviously. And I wrote another play just out of COVID. A theatre had given like commissioned me to do a play for when they'd just come out of lockdowns. So I wrote this other play that Sharina was also in, where she played pregnant because I thought she's never going to get to play pregnant in this other play that I've been thinking of for years. And anyway, lo and behold, we finally get to last year, and the idea finally comes together of what is now the play. But it has been a really long process. But it's been brilliant because it's like we're saying about the comedy, because I don't necessarily. I do think I walk through life trying to be funny as possible anyway. So it's not so much about adding comedy. It was more that I felt really prohibited by whatever corner I locked myself into with the antinatalism idea, that there was no funny in it. And therefore I was bored. If I'm bored writing it after like 10 pages, then what on earth is the point of doing it? Whereas when I kind of started to unlock this, and Party Baggage was actually a short play, it's in the short play is actually in the middle of this play that existed. I wrote in 2019, funnily enough, around the same time I'd come up with the idea. And I never quite realized that was actually the key to unlocking the door to this play. That then I kind of really started to see the humor in it. And it is wonderful to write for people you know are going to be in it. It was writing for myself, which I find easy enough to do because I know what I feel comfortable with and where I want to push my own boundaries. And Sharina, I know so well that I have exactly the same feeling for her, which I think then helps it be funnier because it's written to all of the strengths we have to be as funny as possible or to be as emotional as possible and everything else, which is really wonderful.
That's really good to hear. So how long is the play now? I mean, in this current iteration?
Like running time,
Yes.
it's about 90-95 minutes without an interval.
Okay. I mean, that's a good amount of time to convey a good
Oh,
chunk
and
of
I
the
don't I
story.
don't like I think I'm a real person of make it as short as possible. Like if I thought this story could have been 60 minutes, I only would have done 60 minutes. I hate filler. And one thing I've realized over the plays I've done over the years, which is one thing I don't notice I've done, and then when I've done it, I feel very proud of it, is they're never boring, which I'm quite happy with. More out of a sense of, I mean, it's your opinion if people like the stories or not. Like that's their opinion, but more that everything paces itself in a way that even when we're performing it, like we were running it this week, we ran it twice in a rehearsal this week, and I would think it was about 40 minutes long, but it's actually about 95. Even when you're doing it, and I know this play inside and out, obviously, having built it from the ground up, and I still don't feel quite bored of doing it. Like I feel really invigorated by it. I actually enjoy it more every time we've done it, which has been wonderful. So I hope that's something that the audience can take away from it as well is that, not only is it literally not particularly long, it's not 2 acts long and 3 hours or whatever else, but it also kind of feels snappy. It feels like a nice, little snack. I really am happy with it in that regard.
Yeah, completely no offense to the longer plays out there. I'm sure there's a reason why they're that long,
Oh, and
but
I
it's just not your
love
style.
but it's not even my style. I love watching a longer play. So I recently
Mm.
saw The Hills of California, which is the first thing I could think of because I discussed this in relation to that play with somebody, which is what I think it's just over 3 hours. That play is 3 acts. I loved it. I love a mega long play. My thing is, I'm a bit scatty. So when writing, I'm watching it and I'm thinking 15 minutes of this play on the page, I would struggle to write these like really slow and meandering. I can't visualize slow and meandering. I think maybe that's something that comes with time and more experience, but I would really struggle to write a 3 hour play because I'm not good at letting like 5 pages go by and it feel like it's really intentionally slow. Whereas I'm pretty good at, you know, keeping it going a little bit, not in a way that feels rushed, but the ebb and the flow of a quick bit, a slow bit, a quick bit, a slow bit. Whereas a play like that is just constantly a slow burn, which I think I'd find quite anxiety inducing to write. But to watch, I love it. Personally, I love it. I remember when I was about 18, there was a I think it was Eva Van Hove did 3 Shakespeare plays together in an afternoon at the Barbican, which took up like 8 hours. I think it was called Roman Tragedies, and I loved that. So anything long, I personally love watching, but I wouldn't expect me to write anything long anytime soon.
But it's interesting when you say that because what you said earlier was that actually is that realistically what two one person plays interwoven into one. So
Yeah.
actually there is quite a long piece of standalone one person show effectively
Mm.
on stage. And one of the things that intrigued me earlier, which also implants a little bit of dread. I don't know whether that's genuine dread or not, but when you use the word referendum with the audience, I'm
Mhm.
just thinking, God, are you expecting audience participation in this?
Very much the opposite. So this play is very meta. It leans into being meta. Again, when I was saying about those promo videos leaning into things, the idea is in these videos, we are always talking to the lens. And the point we're trying to get across is this play, it is spoken to the audience the whole time, but it's made clear from the very beginning, explicitly, that the wonder of it, the arrogance of the characters really loves it, that they can't talk back. And that's one thing we say from the beginning. We say that, we want you here to witness us, to see us. And that is a really big part of this story. And that is it doesn't really ruin the end by any stretch. But that is a big problem they have as you go through this play and you realize these people are desperate to be seen. They want the attention. And it's not even attention, it's just to be witnessed. They're these two friends who have so many issues with Natalie with her mother and Finn with the ex-boyfriend and feeling distant from his friend and everything. They don't quite realize if they just turn to look at each other in this play that the whole time they deliver straight out to the audience to talk to them, everything they need is in the other person, the friendship they've always had. They just haven't really turned to one another. So there was never, I knew I wanted the audience to be a character in the play, and we do talk with the audience the pretty much the whole time. The thing is pretty much direct address to the audience, besides one bit in the middle. But it is explicitly brought up that the wonder of that for these characters is they can't talk back. And they're saying, please don't talk back to us. And the point is really, we are observing with the audience, the characters are observing with the audience, kind of how silence is sometimes a help and other times feels like great judgment, especially when you've been incredibly vulnerable. And that's where this referendum goes. So people coming should not in any way expect to be involved, because even as a like outgoing person as myself, I would rather die than have to be involved in a play from an audience perspective. I think it's really anxiety inducing. I was not prepared for it. So no one is involved or dragged up, but everyone, but we're all in a small room. It's a small theatre, the Drayton Arms Theatre. So it feels wrong to ignore the fact that we're all in this room together, and that leaning into that community spirit of the theatre.
And that's absolutely right. I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Whenever I see a sign, sometimes when shows put up a sign to say that there may be audience participant or there will be audience participation, that's the when I go in and ask, the usher and ask and basically say to them, where can I sit so
Yeah,
I
please,
don't get
please hide
picked.
me. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean that's usually my go-to for most of the things. If I see that sign and think, okay, I'm going to hide somewhere,
Mm.
definitely not the first row. But it's actually coming to a slightly different topic. So you're saying that you know Sharina previously.
Yes.
So working with someone that you're familiar with, actually. So how does that change the dynamic of the interaction on stage? Do you find it easier, actually, or
Yeah,
do you find it a little bit harder?
infinitely easier. No, completely easier. And I mean, as I say, this play was written for the two of us. So I kind of wrote into it our friendship. And in some respects, there are there are dynamics that I would say are parallel to our friendship in it. So I've tried not to write our friendship into it because we want to challenge ourselves instead of just delivering what feels like a version of us. But it's kind of sits beside it. So it feels comfortable to kind of banter back and forth with one another, because there are 5-minute chunks where we're talking with one another at the audience, whatever else. Like there has to be this sense of these two people have been friends for a long time, which is really helpful for delivering that relationship, because we have been friends for since Sharina came to my school in 2015. So we've been friends for nearly 10 years now. um and really good friends, like consistently the whole time, and obviously we've done lots of different things together, so we know how the other person works. And I think the thing for us is there's so much trust. There's so much trust and so much faith in the other. It feels like a complete safety net. I would say it's so not anxiety inducing, because even if something were to go wrong, I trust in Sharina and vice versa, that we are both not only confident enough, but perhaps skilled enough at solving the problem. If someone we were joking, there's one scene where Sharina is sat kind of center stage speaking to audience almost, and I'm supposed to be on this stool that's near her out of the spotlight to pass her something, right? It makes no sense explained, but in the reality. And we were joking, what would happen if I lean on this stool and I actually fall? Like, what on earth do we do? Like, there is a possibility that on this bar stool, there's no reason why when you lean, you could just slip. And I was like, that'd be so embarrassing. So, of course, we're laughing about the thought of it. And she immediately comes back to me with this quick idea. She's like, well, I'll just do this. And that would be hilarious. Everyone will laugh. And you're like, gosh, yeah, that would work so well. And finding those ideas are, sometimes you see something where someone has to save somebody in that regard, and it kind of reads as you've really saved them. Like, it doesn't read into the story at all. It just feels like trying to cover up the awkwardness. But both of us in that regard are so quick, I think, at knowing this piece, knowing one another, that the idea she suggested to save it was like, that would seem like it was written in. It would actually seem an intentional joke. Like, that's crazy. And I think to have that faith in one another's ability, and not only complete comfort being vulnerable around one another, especially when rehearsing, is so vulnerable to be doing anything like this, especially with something with a text that only we know. So we don't fully trust it's amazing. It's not like doing Death of a Salesman, where we're like, well, it's a great play, so no matter what we do, people will enjoy it. You're like, this is completely, I've made this up the top of my head. It's scary. It's really anxiety inducing because as far as we're concerned, it's good, but that doesn't mean anything. As far as the greater world is, if you read anything 100 times, you'll think it's good in the end, but everyone's seeing it for the first time. And I think having that, neither of us feel like we have any sort of wall up in front of us. We are completely open with the other. That makes the process 100 times easier for sure.
So obviously you are performing over tonight at the Drayton Arms Theatre at the end of May. Can you remind us what the dates are for the
26th and
show?
27th.
26th and 27th. So we'll leave a link
It's a bank holiday
to this.
week. So
Oh,
it's
the
either
bank holiday
or a hinge.
weekend.
Everyone's either away or looking for something to do. So
So okay, well, I mean, for people who are watching this, you have plenty of notice, so you know exactly where to find Shaun and the show. So in terms of the space itself, obviously you say that a lot of time you're talking at the audience and not expecting, well, really prohibitive from talking back. So how does the space work? Do you think a smaller theater work better with this type of show, or do you think something slightly different in setup might work better with this?
this is a good question because I think there's one thing that is not discussed very often when being, I would say early career. I actually personally describe myself as pre-career, really, when coming to writing, is always, I believe, write for the space that you know you're going to have. Um, if I were to have written a play that had 10 characters and was huge, it never would have happened. I mean, if I could have found 10 people, great. But like it wouldn't have been appropriate for the size. That is never the theatre I would have at this stage. It just is not happening. So for me, it was always about I knew it wanted to be two people. I knew that it would have intentionally minimal set, rely heavily on props, like something that I knew would be attainable by doing this thing. And in that regard, yes, it's kind of built for, I suppose, a theatre of this size. Though with this play, unlike let's say the monologue play I did originally, Paper Dolls, like whenever that was 5 years ago, which is very much small and could never be bigger. This does have the energy somehow of existing in many different ways. And I think it's because there's that relationship with audience, which in some respects kills the idea of whatever stage you're on. Because all that matters really is building intimacy with the audience. And you can build intimacy with an audience if you know about how to do it or you work hard enough on doing it at any size. You go to a concert at the O2 and it can still feel intimate somehow. And versus going to something at Brixton, which somehow doesn't feel intimate. Like it's all to do with commanding control of the audience. So as much as it's very much written for a space of this size, and eventually, obviously, for this theatre in particular, I think it does have crossover appeal in that regard. I mean, I'd love to see it somewhere like in the round or something like that would be fun because of course you're with the audience the whole way around you then. But yeah, it feels flexible. It feels like if it wanted a life again in the future, it could very much find a new home and it wouldn't be too worried about what that home was to look like or feel.
Mm. And just one for maybe this is for probably the last question for today, and until I actually see the show at the end of May, because there's so many questions that I mean I just frankly I cannot ask until I've seen this. And so obviously you said that you wrote this and you're also playing in it. So how does it feel actually playing a character that you wrote yourself and actually taking on the personification? I know you said that to a certain degree it mirrors a little bit of your friendship with Sharina, but actually playing a role that you wrote yourself. How does that feel as an actor?
Mm. I've only really played things I've written myself for a very long time now. I can't really remember. It must have been at least 5 years since I last played a role that I hadn't written myself. Um, so I'm very used to it. I think what's fun about it is when I'm writing it, of course, I'm thinking I'm trying to make it easier for myself in some respects. I'm challenging myself in the parts I want to be challenged. So I'm intentionally not writing a part that is me, very much not, completely by design, and then trying to build into the script, like when writing my monologues, I'm trying to think, I remember lines in this kind of way. So let's try and frame it a bit to mirror the way I learn the lines. But when actually coming to the process of performing the own part, of course, I'm also directing the play. So holding all those and producing it. So holding all the hats at once is hard, but it's one of those things you learn to do over time. And what I've really learned, especially when it comes to performing, is you drop as many hats at once as you can. So the play's written now, it exists. So I am never thinking of it as a writer by any stretch of the imagination. And because it's just the two of us, in many respects, I've not like there's nothing with this play that says directed by me. I've intentionally avoided that dialogue because in many respects, it's heavily suggested by me because I wrote it and I know what I saw in my head. But Shireen is also involved in that. So it's in some respects, it's kind of built from two actors taking a script. So I would just look at it through that lens the rest of the time. I do not think of it as a play I've written, apart from when talking about it with you right now. When we're rehearsing it, I completely forget that I wrote the words. It doesn't, I just interpret it as an actor would. We discuss it as if it's like completely third party to you. Because I know from past experience, trying to also be in the head of the person that wrote it at the same time as perform it and everything else. This sense of arrogance almost an ego becomes really obvious when performing it. It becomes like the playwright is saying the words, which I find so repulsive to watch and also think about the fact I'd just done that I've kind of come to learn now. You didn't write it. Don't even think about who wrote it. Like that's beside the point. This is just the play we interpret in this way. And then it loses that, which is wonderful. Then it kind of it's easier to manage all those different roles and things like that.
And actually, as a follow-up, and I know it's the last question was going to be the last question, but evidently not. Um, so obviously, having wrote the script, and even though however much you try to detach yourself from that, when you're performing this, have you had any kind of inclination to think, oh, I should not have written that. I'm going to change this dialogue
Yeah, no,
completely
yeah.
as I perform.
Yeah, I do that. Not as I perform, because I that is really scary. Because one thing people say to you is like, if you can't remember the monologue properly, it's fine because you wrote it. And I thought, yeah, but I wrote it that way. I didn't improvise it. If I was an improviser, then I would not have written a word. Like I can't just bring up off the top of my head that well. I can normally guess what I've written, but I definitely couldn't do that. So no, not while performing. But there
But
are
as
times,
you rehearse, I
yeah,
think
there are
that's,
things that
yeah.
we've rehearsed that have kind of come through, and I've kind of been like, that's a bit naff. Or we've done it, and then sometimes like I've misremembered the line slightly, and you're like, oh, actually, that's a much more succinct way of saying the same thing. Let's just say that. Or there are times, of course, when staging that when I've been visualizing it doesn't quite work. There's one point where Sharina, we never leave the stage in this play. Even though sometimes one of us is monologuing, the other isn't. So Sharina at one point has to get from behind me to in front of me, basically, and pull this chair around. But like when directing it, you're like, oh, there's nothing for her to say. So it just looks really weird if she just kind of stands up and awkwardly meanders. So then you kind of are adding in lines there, or there's another part where you're like, oh, actually, you speaking for far too long here means I'm just stood here like a lemon looking at you. Don't do that. So it's more, yes, changing the lines, but it's actually not so much out of a, oh, to really get this idea across, because that's normally locked down when writing it. And especially when writing this play, I have a few people that I like close friends that I really trust the opinions of go back and forward. And especially Sharina being one of them, being like, what do you think would come here? What do you think? How do we pen that? So that's already all done. It's more looking at it now from a, how do we keep the flow going? I'm really tuned into when directing something and performing it the constant flow of watching a thing. It doesn't matter if it was written and it had beautiful flow and read, because a play isn't read. A play is to be seen. So when it's on the stage, if there is that moment of where Sharina's plod to the front, and it's so awkward, you're like, that kills it. You've just killed the vibe. So you have to sometimes change the dialogue and the script and whatever else to fit this sense of constant flow, so everyone feels like they're involved in it. So long-winded answer to that. But yes, sometimes you do, but depends on the situation.
Yeah, but it's more of a refinement process as
Yeah, I
you
suppose so.
try to bring to life what was written on paper and actually conceptualizing it to something that is suitable as something to be seen instead of read, as you said. So I think
Exactly. I
hugely
haven't,
important.
when writing something, I do visualize it really well, if I do say so myself, but I can see it in my head really clearly when writing it. So normally I've almost directed it by the time I finish writing it because I can really see it. But sometimes, of course, you get up on your feet and I think, what on earth did I see there? Because I can't fathom how on earth that would have worked. So that's when you have to kind of pull those bits apart and sort them out.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I think that's exactly it, But I'm sure every writer and director go through that process as they see and conceptualize and
Yeah.
bring to life a piece of written work as they see it. But thank you very much, Sean, for having you for
So
joining
much
us
for
this morning.
speaking.
Um, And it's been wonderful talking to you, and I can't wait to see the show at the end of May. So
Oh,
I'll put again, like I said, I'll put a link in the description on where to find you and the show. But it's only for 2 days at Drayton's Arms Theatre. So if there's an interest and if you're finding yourself looking for something to do over the bank holiday weekend, there's your solution. Well, thank you very much, Sean.
thank you so much. Thank you.